Hi, everyone. Welcome back to VCC Talks, the podcast for everything clean transportation. I'm your host, Sher, and I'm back with another episode with our special guest today, Tucker Perkins. Tucker is an energy expert with over 4 decades of experience in the renewable energy field. He currently serves as the head of the Propane Education and Research Council and has been since 2017. His quintessential book, Path to Zero, which we'll dive a little deeper into later, thinks expansively about the future of net zero and is based on Tucker's podcast of the same name. So something him and I seem to have in common. So thanks for joining us today, Tucker.
Oh, it's great to be with you. And I know I get to speak sometimes all over the world, but it's nothing better than speaking to Virginians about this issue. So thanks.
I really appreciate that. We think so too at VCC. So just to dive right in, I'm curious about your story before you assumed your current role at PERC. Could you describe your path to propane and more broadly, what sort of drew you to the world of alternative fuels?
And my path to propane was probably like a lot of people's, watching my father labor and do really well in his role running a propane company that started in Richmond, then grew to Charlottesville, then kind of grew pretty much into Virginia. And so I grew up in that environment and worked there through my summers, went to college to be an engineer. And after college, I knew I didn't want to work for my dad. Not that I didn't enjoy being around him, but I knew I needed to chart my own path. So I was a consultant engineer until I was recruited away to work in the natural gas space. And it was fascinating because I learned about pipelines. I learned about LNG export and kind of understood that span. But after a while, the natural gas company I was working for absorbed the propane company. And really, I just kind of found myself drawn to the entrepreneurial nature of the propane industry. Still energy, but really entrepreneurial, unlike the natural gas industry. So I just kind of found my passion there. And once I found my passion, I took more delight in working with the people. And then, really over the last 2 or 3 decades, as the conversation has really moved around how do we define clean, it's been really rewarding to represent kind of a really low carbon hydrocarbon that just seems to fit so well with even today's narrative.
Yeah, that's amazing. And for those of our listeners who might not be familiar with it, what are sort of the benefits of propane as an alternative fuel as you see it? And how has, more specifically, PERC sought to advance and integrate the use of propane into daily life?
Yeah, well, if you don't mind, I'll start with the last question first. What is PERC doing? I think the Propane Education Research Council, which really thinks exclusively about American businesses. While we may work on clean cooking in Africa or the plight of farmers in South America, we are consumed by thinking about propane in America. One, to think about safety and training for both customers and the industry, architects or engineers or tradesmen. We spend a little bit of time talking about propane just so people have a general awareness. But our real goal is to think about the way we use it and to make the way we use it as technically efficient as possible. And 15 or 20 years ago, efficient meant get better miles per gallon. Today, efficient might mean have cleaner emissions. But we're really just steady talking, and you and I'll talk over the next couple of minutes about even how we're trying to future-proof the industry well past 2030 or 40, but into 2050. So we're at PERC, we're really thinking about the next level of engines, the next level of fuel, how that all comes together to give the best user experience possible. Now, to your first question, it's almost so easy, and I struggle some days to why we're not consuming all of the propane in America to replace diesel fuel. Because diesel fuel, and I'll get a couple of hate mails from this, I'm sure, because I always do when I talk poorly about diesel fuel or heating oil. But the fact remains that diesel fuel is inherently dirty. It's inherently dirty to make. It's inherently dirty to store and transport. It can contaminate soil and groundwater, as we so often do see it happening. And when it's consumed in vehicles or off-road applications, it produces quite a bit of NOx, quite a bit of particulate matter, known carcinogen, the latter, harmful to young lungs or everyone's lungs for NOx. And there just is a better fuel. In fact, there are lots of better fuels. But fortunately, I think propane today, renewable propane tomorrow, is just such a great transportation fuel. Energy dense, affordable, easy to refuel. So the infrastructure is just not a big deal. And we're coming out of a period where we've been consumed about thinking about a transition to battery electric vehicles. Maybe where that didn't work, hydrogen was going to be a probable solution. But here we sit with this technology available today that can power class 4, 5, 6, 7 vehicles and do it so well, so clean, so quietly. So it's an easy conversation today, I think.
Yeah, it really certainly is a great option. It's a great option for some of those heavier duty vehicles as well, like you mentioned. My next question is how have, and you touched on this a little bit, your previous pursuits, particularly your background as an engineer, sort of informed your current views on alternative fuels, whether that be propane or other fuels?
Yeah, and I try to start every day with not thinking about how are we going to advance the world of propane, but what is the data telling us? Where is the science going? What's the truth about this basket of competing fuels? And you won't hear me advocate for all things propane for all applications. I just don't believe it. And transportation is a classic example. In fact, I think UPS is a beautiful example. UPS runs gasoline and diesel and battery electric and hybrid and propane and LNG and natural gas because they just have such a diverse fleet that not one fuel is the silver bullet solution. But I'll go back to your question. I was fortunate enough to choose to be an engineer and kind of get linear thinking and have a really good understanding of science and physics and chemistry. And then I've worked around a lot of smart people for years. I love my exposure to natural gas, so I understood that. The last 10 years, I've just been consumed by understanding how we make, store, transport, and consume electricity. And then the last piece of this was trying to understand where we are with hydrogen. And as all of us in the space labor about making renewable propane, you wind up being a chemical engineer as well, trying to understand feedstocks, feedstock conversions, and the end product. But when you tie all that stuff up in a bow, which, you made a reference to the book, and it really was the primary story we were trying to make in the book, is that this is not a story of one energy, of electrification, right? And electric vehicles and electric heat pumps and electric arc furnaces to make steel. It had to be more. We knew it had to be more 5 years ago. It just didn't make sense until nuclear fusion perhaps makes sense. And I think you unfortunately will not be youthful, I think, by the time nuclear fusion is a reality. So tie it all up in a bow. What you realize is that propane inherently is so much better than most of the fuels we're thinking about today. It's available, it's domestic, it's relatively easy transported. The infrastructure is without peer. And then when we consume it, there is no methane leak. There is no particulate matter to speak of. NOx is so low, while we can measure it, it's still below ultra low NOx standards. And every day we work on durability and even more efficient so we make less CO2. And we still have a great CO2 story.
Yeah, so as the decades change, and as you and your personal experience as someone with decades of experience in the climate space, how have you seen the industry change and shift over time, and what changes are you sort of expecting in the future?
Thanks for the question. So what we've seen happen just in the last 5 years is I think modern engineering matched up to modern manufacturing. And we can do things with internal combustion engines that 5 years ago we just didn't think were right. We can design them better using the latest design techniques, computational fluid dynamics to be exact. Then we can build them better using modern manufacturing. So the tolerances are tighter. Just everything works better. The control systems are better. So what we are delivering today is a fundamentally different engine than we delivered even 5 years ago. They're durable. They're very efficient. It's a modern engine. Where I get probably really excited about the next 5 years is the advent of more and more renewable fuel. So 5 years ago, renewable propane was an idea, but it really wasn't reality. Today, we're making 20 million gallons at about 4 different facilities. Pretty well limited today just by demand, but we had 1 or 2 ways we could make it. Now, a couple of years ago, we decided we could make it from farm plants like Camelina. That was exciting. But now we're so deep into CO2 conversion, direct conversion through plasma or electrochemical processes to make propane, priority use of propane. So it's really exciting. And I think Well, we're already doing it. So to say it's futuristic is not true. Commercial fleets already consuming renewable propane, but I think you'll see it coming more as a de facto standard in transportation, on road and off road. The other thing, Ella, just as we think, Clean Cities has been so good about thinking about gasoline and diesel fuel differently and thinking beyond just on road. We are having a massive surge of equipment going into ports. And, ports or supply chains been so top of mind really ever since COVID. We never stopped talking about it. But we introduced into the port of Newark, and now they have essentially standardized there. And I love that press conference because the executive director of the port lives right downwind of the port himself. And he was quick to say, I'm benefiting myself. I'm benefiting my neighbors as I clean up the air around this port, as I quiet streets around this port. I'm benefiting myself and my own community. So, and we're doing the same in Long Beach. We'll have a press conference soon to talk about really the role of propane into that port. So right off the bat, number one port, number two port in America are both moving quickly to propane across a variety of on-road, off-road uses. So we'll start introducing renewable propane to a lot of these first environmentally sensitive areas, and then I think generally to the motoring public.
Well, that's very insightful. So thank you for that response. I want to get a little bit into your book next. We've sort of been dancing around it a little bit, but the theme of your book, Path to Zero, is centering around 12 climate conversations that you had with scientists, advocates, professionals about their own perspectives on climate change and the climate sphere and everything around it. What is the main point you would like readers to take away from your book? And secondly, how have those conversations framed the way that you talk about the climate crisis?
Really helpful question. So, it's interesting when we wrote the book, when we were researching to write the book, and then really over the couple years that we've been really preparing to launch or launching the book, the conversation was quite different than the narrative today with Trump leading the charge. The story we were trying to tell there is that net zero is a real goal. We should all be emphatically supportive of near zero or net zero goals for climate, and that we could get there through innovation and technology and scientific discussion and rigor and conversations. We could get there, and the way we're going to get there is for people to act. So there were kind of three, if you will, main points as we were writing the book. One, we should embrace net zero. To leave the earth better than we have it right now would be a very reasonable goal for all people. Secondly, innovation and scientific research would lead us there. And then thirdly, we needed to discuss it. We needed to collaborate. We needed to agree on paths, and then we needed to act. Because at the time we wrote that, it was just so much disagreement, so many different ways about saying my path is the path, when in fact we knew the wide path was the path. Not all of the above, because some of the above needed to go, right? And we still have that fight. Is this energy transition or is this energy addition, right? We still have that fight, particularly here in Virginia, as we really lead the conversation around data centers and what data centers mean in terms of growth in the electric grid and the ability of the electric grid to support data centers in that growth. But those were the three issues around the book. And I'm really proud that almost 3 years after we had the ideas for the book and started whiteboarding what we wanted to say, that we are as right today as we hoped we were 3 years ago. And to your point, in the book, we did go in 12 climate conversations, but it was the result of literally over 100, I think today probably 125 conversations. People with varying views, pro-nuclear, anti-nuclear, pro-climate, anti-CO2. I mean, almost what you and I would call climate deniers, and well-respected scientists on most sides of every issue. So it really has given me a front row seat to a lot of the deliberations and scientific rigor on both sides of these arguments. I would say what keeps coming back to me is what we said then, that engineering and science and collaboration can lead us to a better place if we in fact let it happen. I would say, I did an interview this week in Canada, and they're talking to me about drill baby drill and the endangerment rule being under attack. And the point I make, and I hope I'm right, I certainly believe I'm right as I think about our native Virginia and maybe the states that even touch Virginia, because I'm so active with most of those people, is that government may want to relax some of these rules, and it may be rightfully so too, is let some of the technology catch up. But I do think think consumers and parents and companies still want to see sustainability initiatives. And given a chance to use diesel or choose a cleaner fuel like propane or natural gas, or even a most clean fuel like renewable propane or renewable natural gas, I find that consumers want us to make those choices, and companies, particularly companies that are proud of their brand, they want to do that too. And so while I feel like the government is maybe changing one conversation, I think consumers and companies still have top of mind around sustainability. Yes, it needs to be affordable. Yes, it needs to be achievable and easily maintained, and it needs to allow them to get their products and services delivered. But given a choice between old school and something new school that allows them to meet their objectives, to be a good steward in their community, have healthier employees who have healthier children, they're going to make that right choice. And that's where we're going to stay focused over the next 4 years, is talking about domestic energy, talking about affordable energy. I love the concepts of environmental justice and equity. It's one of my most favorite conversations to talk about, because I think it is so relevant about who pays, who benefits, and we can talk about it specifically with propane, choosing propane beyond the natural gas mains normally for residential, commercial, industrial applications, and then in transportation for a whole host of medium duty applications. It's the right thing for both consumers, the corporations that choose it, and then the environment.
Yeah, I agree totally and completely. Listening to your community and starting local is really where that all begins. Moving on to my next question is, you talked a little bit about how you're so proud about the book, The Path to Zero, and some of those key initiatives. So looking back at all of your experiences, is there a particular key initiative or project that you've started that has made you especially proud? Maybe it's the book, maybe it's something else you haven't said yet.
Well, I am proud of the book, and the book's certainly bigger than me, right? The book was about a whole team around me that was working with the podcast and people on the podcast and what they were saying, and a lot of research about what do we believe the world would look like for renewable electricity, for hydrogen and natural gas and propane and diesel fuel and gasoline and maybe batteries, all these things that we were trying to understand. So I am proud of the book and the story we told. Probably what I'm proudest of right now is just being out front and helping tell the story. Not only creating awareness for how propane fits into this equation, but to a degree dispelling the myth that all fossil fuels are bad. I never believed that. In fact, I thought that was a dangerous statement. Certainly, I believe coal, oil, and wood are bad, but I certainly believe that electricity that's made from coal, oil, and wood might be worse, right? The direct use versus the indirect use and the inefficiencies of that. So I've loved the fact about telling the story. What is the true story of hydrogen? Is all hydrogen green? Well, not at all, right? Most hydrogen is gray and fairly thermodynamically inefficient, if you will. It takes a lot of BTUs to make a BTU of hydrogen, takes water. So telling the story of the other alternatives, and also to a degree helping everyone try to apply science and engineering to improve their product like we have. So I am proud of that. I would also say I'm proud of our industry. I think our industry has hung in there and continues to think differently about the future, right? We're not content with propane as it's made today. We want it to be a lower carbon fuel. We really want to introduce blends with renewable propane. We've had some amazing launches right here in Virginia. Petersburg was an early on adopter of renewable propane, and they were using it in school buses and then some of their commercial mowing equipment, and just kept expanding the use. Chesterfield has been an unbelievable supporter of propane for school fleet, for how the county uses it in a lot of vehicles to transport books to and from the libraries. They're using a propane fueled vehicle. So just a great story, and one we're keeping. I think the story is just unfolding in Virginia as we begin to deal with the data center growth that's in front of us, and where the electrons that we have, how they'll be consumed, and then other people that are ready to think about microgrids and decentralized power and a variety of things. So it's a really exciting time, I think, to be in the clean energy space. And I think the next 5 years are going to be as exciting as we've seen.
Absolutely. Yeah, I went to a clean fuels vehicle demo and got to sit in a propane school bus, and it was super cool. And VCC is doing a lot of work with that. So that progression in Virginia is really fun to watch, and it's really great work. So,
Yeah, the statistic we throw out there is the savings that come from using a propane school bus instead of a diesel school bus. So not would put about 23,000 teachers into the classroom. And if you do work with many of these schools, systems that have really begun to have the majority of their vehicles propane fueled, you see not only the ease of maintenance, how quiet it is, how well it works in the winter when things are cold, how warm they are for the students, how the lack of smells and all that's positive. You begin to see what saving money really means in a fleet. Well, I love to save money for UPS or a police fleet. It's really rewarding to save money for a school. They buy iPads and they buy more computers and they put more teachers in the classroom or better helmets for the football team. It's just totally rewarding to see the intersection of savings from making good fleet choices and then how they deploy those savings.
Absolutely. And speaking about some of those younger folks, what is your best advice for younger people who might be worried about the future of climate change and their natural environment? And do you think that there are any actionable steps that they can take right now to help make their communities more sustainable?
Congratulations on the question. You've asked the exact question that I think we should all ask ourselves, and I'll come back to that. But the question you ask is, what can I do today? How can I act today? So let's back up to how you originally phrased it. What is my advice for young people? But I might say it'd be for people really of all ages, because it is scary, right? It's scary as we have a world that is a little bit at odds with what's the meaning of sustainability and how do we get there and who pays for it and what's the role of the developing nations against the undeveloped nations. I have strong opinions on all of that, but I'll save them for another day. But I think young people, people of all ages, need to be concerned. We need to begin to think to a degree about adaptation and how does that impact all of us. But to your point, we all need to act. Maybe it means we just get into forums where the conversation is happening and we put our opinions in there. But it also might mean that we do turn our thermostat down, or when the opportunity presents itself, that we buy a more efficient furnace. And that given a chance between leaving the lights on and turning the lights off, we might do that. As we think a little bit broader about our role in companies and fleets and organizations, we can really take a leadership role in thinking about our carbon footprint. And by the way, to me, it's beyond carbon. What's our NOx inventory? What are we doing on some of these other harmful pollutants? And how can we reduce it? By choosing more efficient engines, different types of fuel. And I think that's what we have to do. Well, we're not going to get there by a government mandating us to do something in 4 or 5 years, right? We're going to get there because people know it's good for themselves and good for their families and good for their friends. And that's what I think we're going to see over the next years. I think we'll see hybrid powertrains that are be mixes of the best of internal combustion engines married to best of electric powertrains. And we're neck deep now in some of that design ourselves to bring that next version of engine out. We'll see this movement to renewable fuels, both natural gas and renewable propane. And I think we'll continue to see, certainly in Virginia, we know we're going to see wind. Dominion's leading that effort right now in their offshore program. But we're going to continue to see solar where solar makes sense and wind where wind makes sense. And we'll see better batteries. And so again, there is a reason for optimism. There's not a reason for despair. There is a reason for optimism and hope. And I do encourage people to think scientifically, but we also need people who are thinking about human factors and social issues. And we all need to be in the same room, reach a consensus on how to act, and then to act. It's quite that simple.
You said it perfectly. I think we need a lot of optimism and hope and positivity right now during a transition of energy. So that's great. Tucker, we're approaching our last question, and I would just like to thank you so much for being a guest on our podcast today. You've been insightful and had a lot of things to say about the clean energy transitions, and I'm just really happy that we were able to make this work.
Well, I am amazed at how great a podcaster you are with limited experience. So congratulations. That's a great feat. You are so far ahead of where I was on podcast number 5 or whatever. I'm impressed.
Thank you so much. Alrighty, so the last question is, any last thoughts you would like to share to our guests?
Well, as I think about the listeners here are generally our friends and neighbors in Virginia. If you go back to 1770 or so, and you think about really books have just come out that I've recently read, it just talks about how Virginia was such a leader in forming the United States. And probably without what our founding fathers in Virginia were doing, we probably would have never gotten to 1776 the way we got there. And I think it's a really great time to fast forward what will be nearly 250 years and think about, again, Virginians taking a leadership role in this conversation about what is the role of solar and wind? What is the role of low carbon hydrocarbons like propane and natural gas? And how do we advance their renewable twins, renewable propane and renewable natural gas? And what is the secret sauce to get together to have an affordable but environmentally friendly solution? I'm always proud of what Virginia Clean Cities has done. I'm proud to be on the board of both Virginia Clean Cities and the Greater Washington Clean Cities. And I love the conversations that we're having and the work that we do there. But I just really challenge Virginians 250 years later, after we showed leadership as the country was forming, to continue to show leadership as we rethink sustainability and environmental activism. But I do encourage us all to become environmental activists, right? And to labor for cleaner air and healthier people.
Well said. I know at VCC we really appreciate all the work you do, and Virginians appreciate it too. So thank you so much, Tucker. This was great.
Ella, thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to the Virginia Clean Cities podcast. I'm your host, Ella Sher, and look out for me on new episodes coming soon.